Minister Narendra Modi wraps up his trip to Canada with a visit to the Air India Crash Memorial in Toronto. And then on to Vancouver. An investigation into how the CBC handled the Jian Ghomeshi scandal is released. Ghomeshi is due back in court April 28th. Sirens echo throughout Israel to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 6 million Jews who were exterminated in Nazi death camps. It's been 70 years since the end of the Second World War.
Hi, and welcome to your Humber News Update. I'm Alex Martino, coming to you from our newsroom here at Humber College North Campus. India's Prime Minister wraps up his visit to Canada today. He's in Toronto to lay a wreath at the Air India Memorial site at the Lakeshore, and then flies off to Vancouver. It's been 30 years since the bombing of the 747, killing 329 people of Canadian, Indian, and British nationality. Prime Minister Stephen Harper joined Modi at the memorial today. Last night, nearly 10,000 people packed into the Ricoh Coliseum to hear him speak. After an elaborate opening ceremony, Modi took the stage with Prime Minister Stephen Harper and his wife. The politicians, both leaders of conservative parties, share the same views on many issues. Though his speech was delivered entirely in Hindi, the message is clear. India wants to attract more manufacturing to its developing economy. This is the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Canada in more than 40 years. The 15-year-old Aboriginal girl beaten in downtown Winnipeg earlier this month has been taken off life support. The girl had been in critical condition since being attacked April 1st. The chief of Manitoba's Northern Chiefs, David Harper, says this incident must bring change to Manitoba's Child and Family Services system. The girl was in the province's care when she was attacked by a 15-year-old boy, also in the care of Family Services. He could face more serious charges if she dies. The CBC has fired 2 senior executives. It comes on the heels of a report on how the public broadcaster handled the Jian Ghomeshi scandal. The report concludes that what it calls host culture contributed to managing Ghomeshi improperly. It found that in a small number of cases, his behavior constituted sexual harassment in the workplace. The report says management had 3 opportunities to respond to these cases, but failed to do so. Ghomeshi was fired from the CBC radio show Q back in October after several women came forward with allegations of sexual assault. He faces 7 counts of sexual assault and 1 of overcoming resistance by choking. It comes just days before Q relaunches on CBC with its new host, Shad. The Ontario government plans to sell off 60% of Hydro One. Money from the sale is said to be earmarked to pay for transit and infrastructure projects. The idea to sell Hydro One comes from a government-appointed panel. The panel examined Crown assets to try and squeeze the maximum value from them. Premier Kathleen Wynne says the government wants to make sure consumers are protected against price hikes. Opposition parties warn a sale of Hydro One will do the opposite. The province will retain a 40% stake in Hydro. Some excitement down at the Lakeshore campus today. House Leader and Conservative MP Peter Van Loan is speaking at Humber College. He was invited by the Criminal Justice Program to discuss Bill C-51. That's the Conservatives' new anti-terror bill. Van Loan sat down with Humber News reporter Jordan Finkelstein to talk about changes to the bill.
My first question to you is, there have been many criticisms of the bill in recent weeks. How do you think, have any of these arguments or criticisms gotten to your head and made you think that the bill needs to be revised?
Well, there have been some minor changes made to address some of the concerns with the bill. A lot of them were concerns that, I don't want to call them paranoid, but concerns that the bill could go farther than it actually was intended to. So those clarifications have been there. But the major objective has, of course, been to address some of the gaps that we saw existed previously. For example, to get rid of some of the silos that made it impossible for different departments to share information they would have about potential terror threats between each other. To allow for CSIS, for example, to get involved in disrupting a terrorist plot that was unfolding, allowing it to continue to unfold, for example, so that you have a higher chance of prosecution while at the same time protecting public safety. But the real objective was to keep people safe.
The full interview can be found on humbernews.ca. Overseas now, Israel came to a standstill this morning to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day. Sirens rang out today to commemorate the 6 million Jews who were exterminated in Nazi death camps during the Second World War. During the 2 minutes of silence, traffic came to a halt and people stopped to stand and remember the dead. The siren was followed by a wreath-laying ceremony attended by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's been 70 years since the end of the war. Another dramatic breach of security in the U.S. Capitol. A Florida man has been arrested after landing his gyrocopter on the west lawn of the Capitol building. Florida resident Doug Hughes says he wanted to draw attention to the issue of campaign funding. He was carrying letters from members of Congress calling for changes to the way they finance their campaigns. Hughes was arrested for violating airspace and is facing undisclosed charges. A bomb squad investigated the aircraft and found nothing hazardous. It's the latest in a series of security breaches in the Capitol. To Moscow now, where Russian President Vladimir Putin was the star of his annual live TV call-in show. The president fielded questions from Russians across the country in front of a live studio audience. Putin says the Russian economy is still strong despite international sanctions. He continues to deny a Russian military presence in Ukraine or that Russia is aiding rebels in the east of the country. Putin says he doesn't expect Western sanctions to be lifted anytime soon. Yemen's vice president says he hopes the coalition air campaign against Houthi rebels doesn't extend to the ground. Khaled Baha says a ground offensive would mean more civilian deaths. Planned military exercises in Saudi Arabia have raised a speculation of a ground operation. Baha was appointed by Yemen's ousted president on Sunday and is calling for the military to show their loyalty to the exiled government. Yemen's population, meanwhile, is facing a humanitarian crisis amid the spiraling conflict. The United Nations says half the country's population has little access to food. It says 600 civilians have died since the capital fell. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Shai Williamson will have your 3-day forecast.
Although it'll be really warm today, don't get your hopes up, guys, because we might get some rain this afternoon. We'll have more, including your 3-day forecast, coming up after the break.
But first, check out this crazy video from the slopes in Italy. History was made when British snowboarder Billy Morgan landed the first ever 1800 quadruple cork. The move is done by flipping 4 times while the body spins 5 complete rotations sideways. It took 40 hours for the preparation to perfect the maneuver.